Welcome to FMARC 2026 Doctoral Colloquium. I'm Alessandro Previtero. I teach finance at Indiana University. Today, following my presentation on the art of writing an academic paper, there will be Audra Boone from Colorado State University. She will talk about the job market and networking. Alex Michaelidis from University College London. He will discuss the Imperial College of London. And then there will be Devon Shantikumar from UC Irvine who will discuss how to make research impactful. So, the craft of writing academic paper. What do Steph Curry, Jerry Seinfeld, and Ernest Hemingway have in common? Steph Curry, great basketball player, definitely an artist in basketball, one of the best three-point shooters. Jerry Seinfeld, arguably the best comedian. The Seinfeld Show, I think it's, undisputed the best comedy show. And Ernest Hemingway, I don't need to spend words, but the writer. They are all artists in their fields. Something less known facts about them. So Steph Curry, he practices every day basketball. And every day, as a warm-up, he does 500 baskets. 500 baskets, not 500 shots. He starts his training after he has done 500 baskets. Okay? Jerry Seinfeld, as far as I can tell for the past 30, 40 years, he's been writing a joke every day of his life. He has a streak, and he makes sure that he never misses. He has a red cross when he missed the day, and he guarantees that he has never missed more than 2, okay, for the past 30, 40 years. Ernest Hemingway, someone that enjoys life, but every morning, 5, 6 hours, solid writing, and then the drinking, the enjoying the nature, the traveling. Even when he was not doing well with himself, writing would be the first thing. So why this? Because when I start thinking about writing, I used to give myself an alibi. What was the alibi? I'm not a native speaker. And so how can I write good papers? I'm not an artist. Turns out that even the artists, they put a lot of work. And they are artists because they put a lot of time into the craftsmanship. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. The idea is writing is a craft. Not all of us could become artists, but all of us could put solid hours to become better in the craft of writing. So those are my tips in the process, and I'm learning as I go day after day. So I want to give credit where credit is due. This is a phenomenal book by Michael Weisbach at Ohio State University. If you haven't read this book, I think this book is mandatory for everybody that is teaching finance, economics, accounting. It really gives you, Mike is arguably one of the most successful academics we have in finance, and he gives all his experience. He's been mentored to hundreds of PhD students, very successful. And it's kind of his take on what it takes to succeed. And again, it's a craft. That's the title of the book. So, I will discuss the goals of writing. How do you get your foot into the door? I'm going to discuss the title, the abstract, the introduction. And then the body of the paper, the literature review, the theory, if it's a theory paper, the empirics, and the conclusion, the summary. And I'm going to have some thoughts on AI, of course. I couldn't spare that. So what are the goals of writing? You want to think of writing as like you are a craftsmanship is sizzling its way through a block of wood or marble. Every small movement matters in the end. And so getting a good paper is the sum of paying attention to a lot of details. You don't know what an editor is going to pick. You don't know what a referee, what a reviewer is going to pick. You try to do your best in every single element. And ultimately, you're going to succeed. And so it's about the title, the abstract, the intro, the model, the empirics, the conclusion, tables and figure, the prose, and typos. I bury one typo in my presentation. I'm going to ask you at the end. I bet someone is going to find it. That's just to say that if you have a typo, you are not going to see it, but someone is going to find it. And the typo could be very costly. Okay? And the idea is, think about like you are at an art exhibition. Your idea and your results of your paper is your painting. How do you write it is what you put around it. So basically is, what's the proper framing? Where do you want to put it? What's the lighting? What's the music? How do you want to be dressed at the opening? Everything is going to matter, and all these details, it's the writing process that's around it. So first of all, let's try to understand who is the audience. We are writing for editors, referees, conference chairs, reviewers. Now, everybody has their own incentives. It's important to understand. An editor is going to accept a paper if he thinks the paper is going to be impactful, if it's going to raise the impact factor of the paper. A conference organizer, a conference chair is going to accept a paper if they think the paper is going to be a good paper, it's going to raise the quality of the conference. What's the underlying things that we need to understand is that everybody is stretched thin on time. And so everybody is using this triage approach. It's like when a doctor comes into the AR, they start their shift, they look around, and they quickly assess who needs the most. And so it's important to understand that when you are getting 300 papers out of a conference, or tens and tens of papers every day as an associate editor, as an editor, you are going to skim through the paper. And then you are going to decide to read forward and to read more deeper. So it's important, the first impression. And the first impression, you're going to build it with the abstract, the intro, and the title. Okay? And so another thing that became more transparent to me over time was what's the relationship between the writing and the research. I used to do, I'm an empiricist. So what I would do, I would basically create tables and then say, I'm going to write it up at the end. Last 1 day, last 2 days. Luckily, I moved away from the model, and now I think the writing and the empirical part, the research, as a feedback loop. I actually, when students come to my office and say, what do you think? Is this a good idea? What I would tell them is write a fake introduction. Discipline yourself, write 3 pages, and make up the results. Make up the best results possible you can find. Then write down the contribution of these results to the literature, and what are we learning from your paper. Read it. If that's not good enough, don't even start. But after you find out that's good enough, the key is that in writing it down, you're going to come up with a list of paper that is going to support your argument. And then you touch the data. Then what happens? You do your analysis, you go back, you rewrite the introduction. And you're going to notice when you're writing the introduction that there are going to be some missing links, some missing steps. And that's where you say, oh, I need this table to make this statement. Or these results, I cannot make this statement with this result. So think of it as a circular process, an iterative process. And that's what I just say about the fake introduction and rewrite the introduction. So what are the goals of writing? There are several of them. You want to state your point. You want to communicate to your audience, to your reader, why they should spend their time reading. There are hundreds of papers out there. What's novel, what's interesting for them. You also want to convince the reader that the paper is correct. A paper that is going to be successful, change people's priors. That's what we are all aiming to do. But of course, you have to take someone by their hands and walk them through how you're going to convincingly make the claim that their prior needs to be changed. And so you want to address alternative explanation. You want to give credits to other people. Every time I hear someone, this is the first. I got nervous because it's like, we have been around for decades writing papers. It's very hard to claim that we are the first or something, but we are building on each other. So it's fair to give credit to the others. You want to provide detail about the research process so people can replicate your paper. And you want to be careful in drawing your conclusion. You don't want to oversell or undersell your paper. But, some level of modesty, I think it's needed many times. So let me start, get your foot into the door. Title, abstract, introduction. And so you want to think of this as kind of a sequential step-by-step approach. What's the goal of the title? The goal of the title is having someone read the abstract. That's all there is. Someone reads the title, you want them to stop and give another 2-3 minutes to read the abstract. Okay? And so we all have been guilty as charged with a catchy title. The problem sometimes with the catchy title is that people have no idea what the paper is about. And if they have no idea what the paper is about, and you get 4 emails from SSRN with 20 papers each, you get an email from the MBR with another 20 papers, an email from other institution with another 20 papers, you are not gonna, unless it's someone superstar in the profession, you are not gonna spend time, it's like, I don't understand what this paper is, it's not for me. You're gonna skip it. And so let me give you this example. A couple of years ago, I won an award here with a paper called The Value of Non-Alpha Services. What's the paper about? Clients care not just about performance, they care about financial planning, non-alpha services. And the setting is mutual funds, brokers sold mutual funds, and financial advisor. Who do I want to read the paper? People that are in the mutual fund literature, people that are in the financial advice literature. The value of non-alpha service is not going to get them to read the paper. I like it, but it's not going to get there. Another example, this paper at the beginning was circulating with this name, Annuities and Endogenous Longevity. In the paper, we show that there is a direct effect of annuities, lifetime stream of income, on longevity. And it's not the usual adverse selection effect. People taking annuities end up living longer. Turns out that this is not standard economic theory. People will think that adverse selection is a first order. The idea of moral hazard here is a bit controversial. And so annuities and endogenous longevity in the title is already making a claim. The effects of annuity on longevity, it's something that would not rub the reader in the wrong direction from the beginning. We changed the title of the paper, we started getting into conferences. Before we were not. Okay? So, the abstract. What's the goal of the abstract? You want to get people to read the introduction. That's all there is. They spend 3 minutes reading the abstract, you want them to spend 10, 20, 15 minutes reading the introduction. And so it is okay at the beginning to start with a longer abstract. And then as you present the paper, as it becomes clear and clear what are the key contributions of the paper, you cut it down to the usual 100 words. So don't try to do that from the first draft. Okay? Remember, you are trying to change people's priors. That's the main contribution here. And so you want to present the motivation and the question in the paper, the main results without robustness check, and why we should care about it. The introduction. The introduction is advertising and summary of the paper. After reading an introduction, pretty much a reviewer has already made up their mind whether they're going to accept the paper or not. And and same goes for our referees. Okay? And so you have to cover a lot of material. It needs to be really easy to understand, but you have limited space. It's a key part. And so what you want to do, you want to get people's attention from the beginning. The first paragraph, why they should read the introduction. What is your research question? Right away, they need to know what the question you're trying to answer. You want to report your results, and what is your interpretation of the results? What's the most likely interpretation of the results? And then the implication, why people care about it or should care about it. What the introduction should not be, a mini version of the paper. Okay? There are a lot of details that don't need to be in the introduction. You don't want to go too technical. You don't want to spend a lot of time discussing other people's paper. What's my suggestion here? Read many introductions. There are some very good writers. I was told when I was a postdoc at UCLA, read papers from Andrew Schleifer. He does theory. I'm an empiricist. I've learned a huge deal. He's one of the best writers. But find your favorite writer, read all their introductions. Every year, there are award-winning paper, most cited paper. Just print them out, read it through, crack the code. There is a code. There is a way papers are written. And this evolves over time, so that's why you want to update yourself on how things are changing. But again, every journal has a code. So the body of the paper. The lit review, it could be part of the introduction, it could be a self-standing part of the introduction, but don't just discuss a series of paper. You want to discuss issues. People have studied the effect of fintech on financial trading. I have a paper on the effect on smartphone on retail traders, investor. And so then you give credit, but then it's important for you to highlight your contribution. One line, I contribute to this literature by looking specifically at one type of device and how it works. And don't try to be strategic about citations. Okay? If there is a competing paper, think hard how your paper differentiates itself from the other paper. And if you cannot come up with something, then maybe you need to refocus a bit your paper. But you should be able to articulate in a very simple sentence. There was a paper on smartphone. We'll look at the effect on smartphone on trading on mutual funds. Our paper, we have detailed data on retail investor, all their portfolios. So we can see that actually people switch from mutual funds trading to trading individual stocks. That in itself is something we did not know before. And so if you think carefully, there is a way of differentiating, but you have to be able to tell it in one sentence. If it's a theory paper, you should ask yourself, is the theory paper the main contribution of the paper? I'm saying this because there are more papers that have theory and empirics. If your theory is just a theoretical framework, call it as such, try to be clean, fast, and put a lot of stuff in the appendix. Because the risk is if it's only a theoretical framework and then you spend 10 pages on it, then you're going to draw a theory referee. The theory referee is going to give you credit only for the theory part. And what is going to say? There is nothing new in the paper. Reject. And you were just trying to formalize ideas. Now, of course, if it's a full theory paper, then what you have to do, start simple. Go back. Read Andrew Schleifer's paper. After you read the introduction, you don't need to read the rest of the paper. Because the introduction has a very clean example, how this applies, and it's going to convey the mechanism. There is no algebra there. Of course, the algebra is right. But the point is, you can actually convey all the major points of a theory paper in the introduction and move some of the proof to the appendix. Now, if it's an empirical paper, something we do sometimes is that we are very slow in the sense of we get to the results very late. And so we almost write the paper as a novel, as a mystery. That's not the way you want to do it. You actually want to get to the main results as soon as possible. Now, of course, if there are new data that have specific advantages, you want to make sure that you highlight those specific advantages. Don't discuss just statistical significance. Discuss economic magnitudes. This is so important. And don't overinterpret the results. Every identification strategy has caveats. If we overinterpret the results, we're just going to rub the referee the wrong way, and they're going to come up with an alternative story. Just acknowledge it. We are empiricists. We use messy field data. That's bound to have some limitation. And if you want to have, if you want to have a good sense of what being a bit more humble means, read some of the Topicon journals paper. In finance, we have the last page where we claim contribution in all the literature. In Topicon journal, they have the last 2 pages where they claim limitation on all fronts of their paper. Okay? So when you get to summary or conclusion, again, if there is nothing new, just be brief. 1 paragraph is going to do it. If you have a broader message to share, speculate. Smartphone traders, they buy risky stocks and they buy low risk stocks. As people use more and more smartphone, it might be that the price of this type of security is going to be pushed up. Longevity might have a direct effect of annuities. These are implications on insurance prices of longevity and policy implication for many countries that are moving away from defined benefits towards individualized pension plan. It's fine to speculate. How do you want to improve your prose? Read, read, read. And again, reading is different from listening podcast because you need to see how things are actually written. what is the punctuation that is used, and everything else. Those are a few references here. The slides are going to be posted online, and you can access the live streaming afterwards at any time, so I'm not going to spend time on them. Let me get to my final thoughts. Of course, elephant in the room, AI. And it's important to understand the cat is out of the bag, so there is no way of I'm not going to use AI in my research pipeline. And we are all learning as we go. Let me tell you what I learned in the last 12 months about writing an AI. On the do side, learn how to prompt. So important. Just do this for fun. Query your favorite AI with edit and your paragraph. And then repeat the exercise with light edit and your paragraph. The light edit keeps your tone, your character, your message. The edit gives freedom to do everything. And experiment. The don't, and that's the last point I'm going to make, don't outsource the writing entirely to AI. Many people I've heard say, oh, I'm doing a discussion, I write down the bullet points, or I have a paper, write down the bullet points, and then I ask AI to write it. There is a creative process that happens as you write. As you go from bullet points to paragraph, sentence, coherent sentences, we are learning. Our brain is working. And if you outsource that part to AI, you are killing the creative process. Okay? So try to always be in control on that part. Okay, so hopefully I conveyed the message that writing is a craft, and we can all strive to be better writer. Have in mind your audience. Everybody stretch thin on time. Think about this triage process and minimize, try to do the best in every single part of the paper, from the title to the typos. Where was the typo? Anybody? Okay, probably the audience might have found it. Okay. So we are ready to open it up for questions. We have 5 minutes of question now.
Well, I mean,
I was thinking in the last years there has been, I mean in many years already, there has been this new trend of like writing drafts and then posting that on SSRN and then like presenting, rewriting and so on. So what's your take on like these like multiple revisions? Do you have any advice for like how to handle that? And yeah.
Yeah. So let me tell you what I know as mistakes that I do myself. So I tend to post my paper on SSRN very late. But there is a reason why. Sometimes I post the paper on SSRN and then 2 weeks later I submit the paper, which I think is too late. But let me tell you something though, because there are people that go on the completely other side. So if your paper is out, I'm going to look at your paper only once. I'm not going to bother in 2 years' time, unless I'm a reviewer or a discussant or a referee, to check your paper again. So unless there is a competing team and there are strategic reasons, you want to make sure that there are new data and you are the first one and you want to make sure that's it's very time sensitive, then make sure that whatever you are posting is something that you are comfortable with being the only version of your paper that someone has read.
Thanks, Alessandro. It was very good. Can you say something more about I didn't know about the book that you mentioned by Michael Weisbach. Can you say something more about it? What's the main message?
That's The Economist's Craft by Michael Weisbach. It's basically a nice way of distilling all his knowledge about the academic profession. What I cover is about 1/4 of the book. It's about the writing. But then he has some suggestions on networking, on managing teams. How do you manage teams when you become more senior? How do you have an impact on research? So I would say that I met Mike Weisbach in person, and we had discussion when this was still at the proof stage of the book. I taught the book at the PhD course, and all the PhD students were very excited about the book. So definitely I recommend it. Many of these things you might have known anyway, if you've been long around in the profession, but he has a very nice and cohesive way of putting everything together that I think is very helpful. Yes, please.
Thank you. I was wondering whether you had a perspective on how to write that good introduction. Should we start with our conclusions and then sort of go into detail, or should we start with a base and then building up that pyramid? So reason inductive versus deductively. Do you have a preference? Do you sort of, can you tell us something about this?
So I think it's, I would, my recommendation, and then again, look at how people write papers in the literature. The very good papers are the one where you know what's happening in the paper by page 1.5. So don't make this effort of solving a mystery novel. So I need to get to page 7 to actually understand what's happening in the paper. And so it's almost like when they say you are doing an interview, give an answer. You give the 30 seconds answer, unless you're buying yourself time. Then you just kind of ramble on from the other way. But if you know the answer, you give the 30 seconds, and then if they let you still talk, you go to the 3 minutes version. This is good advice if you are, when you are on the job market, and sorry, I don't want to intrude on anybody else's topic, but have a 30-second pitch of your job market paper. If they let you talk, then you go into the 3 minutes. If they are super excited, then you go into the 10 minutes version. Have the 7, 10, 15. Don't start with the 10 minutes version, and then after 30 seconds, someone leaves, and you are left with the data description. We are good on time, or? Okay. So we are transitioning. Audra Boone from Colorado State University. She will talk about networking and job market.
Thank you, Alessandro.
You're welcome.
Right. Well, again, thank you to the organizers for having me here. So I wanted to talk about navigating the job market and networking. I have moved around a lot, so I might be one of the most qualified people in the finance profession to talk about the job market. Today, I'm going to focus more on the rookie market, though I do think a lot of these same ideas apply across giving other seminars and also later stage career things. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the market, school types, so for example, research versus more teaching-oriented, talk about interviews, then we'll talk about decisions, signals, managing offers, handling competing interest, and then at the end, I'll talk about networking, so what goes beyond just the job market. But I do think that both of these two aspects are very integrated into achieving a successful career. Okay, so think about too, when you're kind of talk to a school, what does each school want? Are you talking to a research-focused school such that they're going to require several papers in the very top outlets in either finance, accounting, economics, for example? So they're going to think not only just about your paper, your job market paper, which is clearly very important, they're very concerned about your pipeline as well. Are you going to be successful coming in and getting out not just your job market paper, but publishing other work as well? And then you could have a teaching-focused school. So they're going to have a higher teaching load, so more student outcomes. And I just want to relate, if you are giving a presentation, they're going to infer from your presentation how well you're going to be able to teach and communicate. So those are not mutually exclusive. So again, strong research still matters, clearly. And then you have those that are balanced, where they value both research and teaching. I would say also that over time, these two things have both teaching and research seem to become more important. It used to be that you had schools that only cared about what your research output was and didn't really care if you were very good in the classroom. And I think that that's not the way it is anymore. Deans, associate deans care a lot about you delivering quality content to the students as well. But also, again, a lot of schools now are emphasizing more and more getting published in those higher quality journals like the FT50. Okay, so before you apply for the job market, one of the critical things is to get your advisor on board, right? Talk to them about the timing, what you're going to target in terms of your school, because they're going to have a sense of realistically where you can place. Again, they've seen this before, so I would definitely recommend listening to them and other people at your institution as much as possible. I would also say cast a wide net. Obviously, you probably have some of your highest target schools, but you never know how the market is going to be. So applying to a wide variety would increase your odds of landing a position at the end of the job market cycle. Then also like that, set your floor in advance? Like what is kind of the minimum that you would be willing to take? So in that sense, what if you have a job offer from a school that you're really not very excited about? Maybe that's because of the colleagues or the resources. Instead of moving there, you might decide to take a visiting position or a postdoc position in order to get a few more years of experience and then hopefully go back onto the market. I will say, though, on this front, we were discussing this at lunch earlier today, that one of the things you have to be cognizant of with a visiting or a postdoc position is by the time you move there and you maybe do some of the teaching, get settled, you're going to be on the market again very soon, so things can go by quite quickly, and you might not feel like you've got as much time to bolster your portfolio as what you had hoped. Make your website work for you. People are going to look at that, right? So either initially or right before your interviews, they're going to look at what you're doing, see how it's presented. So I would make sure that your website looks good, that your papers are updated, your CV, anything like that, that will tell a story about yourself to your potential future colleagues. So again, getting the interviews. Expect noise, right? There's a lot of things that you can't control and things you can control. So things you can't control, the number of applicants per posting, right? How many jobs are actually out there at what types of schools and how many people are coming on the market in a given year, right? This happened at my university last year. What's the subject that they're looking for? We were specifically targeting people that were in investments because we had that need. So we might have seen some really good corporate people, but they were not the first ones that we brought in. So it doesn't say anything negative about those people. It's just that couldn't be our focus. Again, and it could also be departmental politics and budget timing. A lot of schools obviously have gone through some budget constraints, so that might also influence their side. Now, what can you influence? Right? So connections. The faculty at your institutions can open doors and vouch for you directly. It's very common to have advisors reach out to people at institutions, or even I've had co-authors reach out and say, hey, this person is very interested, they're really great. If you can, I would definitely take a look at them. So that means a lot. That goes back to the networking effect that I will continue to hit on later. Again, I mentioned before already the website and a tight, well-rehearsed pitch. Parts of the process you control, again, deserve disproportionate preparation in my mind. Okay, so, and this goes a little bit to what I think Alessandro was saying here, practice and have a pitch, right? So be ready to answer, why is this question important? That should be pretty obvious out of the gate. And by the way, these initial interviews, I'm talking about like the Zoom interviews or the initial ones before you go give an actual job talk. How does it contribute to the literature, right? How are you going to make an impact in the profession? What do you find? Obviously, try to be as succinct as possible. Again, you don't have to always go into a lot of detail here. People want to get the big picture. The other thing that if you can convey this, I do believe it really helps, is what is the genesis of that idea? How did you come up with this research question? Why did it interest you? And part of the reason for that is kind of think about, I call it sort of the RA or thinker test. Are you somebody that can just run regressions and models that somebody else gives you? Or are you somebody that can come up with your own ideas? Here, what people want is somebody that is very thoughtful. It goes back to, I think, what some of the other people will speak to today, but it want to signal whether, again, you're independent research or you can just execute other people's ideas. Translate for the room. By this, I mean that when you are doing these initial interviews, you're obviously going to have people in there that are not familiar with your research. So I do corporate finance research, and one thing that I always find very impressive is when somebody can come in asset pricing or investments or some other area that I don't think about and convey to me, again, why is that important? Why are they making that contribution? So it's the same idea, but you need to make sure it doesn't necessarily have to be at the grandma level that people will talk about, but it needs to at least you can bring everybody in. And then if they want you to dive in further, you can do that. And so again, that goes to the same point, right? Have your 1 minute, 5 minute, 10-minute kind of pitch in order to sell yourself. And then finally, on this point, I wanted to note that make sure you know your CV. If you put something on your CV, you need to be prepared to talk about it. I personally, I almost always want to ask about another paper. Is it something you just tried to put on there to make it look like you did more? Or do you really understand that? Again, it also can reveal whether or not you're intellectually thinking about it or just merely on a paper and running the test. So be careful about that. Okay, so then the interviews. So if you get beyond that first stage and you've convinced them that you're somebody that they might want to hire and you do your campus visit. So again, this is very similar to my last point. Again, what's your research pipeline? Be ready to describe what's coming next. Again, it shows that you will get your papers out and hopefully get tenure there, because people don't want to bring you in only for you to not succeed, right? They're bringing you in because they want you to succeed. And then research the department. I think it's very critical to know who you're visiting and what research they're doing. And I even do this still when I go and give seminars. People like it when you know what they're doing, ask questions about what they're doing. And it also might give you an idea of the types of questions that could come up. If you go into a seminar and you're presenting a paper that is somehow tangentially related to somebody in the room and you don't know that, that's not going to be very impressive to that person. Some people have kind of different feelings on these things. Again, can you ask questions? Non-obvious questions in any kind of the interviews, I think, are welcome. Some people have different views on this. Again, so for the initial interviews, you can ask about the hiring timeline, anything else that you've seen on the website that you want to know about further. It would be a good idea. And should you send follow-up emails? I don't know. I mean, I think it never hurts to communicate afterwards, particularly if somebody gave you a good point and you've thought further about that point or come up with new things. I think that, again, can show that you're intellectually engaged and listening. Okay, so for the campus visit, two things I think are critical. One, again, is to convince the people there that you would be a good colleague, you'd be doing good research, and you wouldn't be a problem in the classroom. You don't want to send a bunch of students to your department chair or to the dean's office. right? So are you a good colleague? The other thing with the market is there's a large degree of information asymmetry. And if you don't reduce that information asymmetry, people are going to fill it for you. So they're going to say, oh, this person would never come here because, or we're going to assume this because. And so to the degree that you can, and there's a lot of questions they can't ask, right, that are not allowed. So if you think that there might be something that would be concerning to them, volunteer that information if you're comfortable doing it. Again, help their decision making before they ask. And I do think, again, people often look for reasons why a candidate wouldn't be a good fit rather than why they would be a good fit. So again, factors that people might think about are your family situation. Do you have a dual career issue? Would that impact your ability to come to a small college town? If you have kids, maybe you don't want to go to a city. So asking questions about the area or saying, oh, this would be a great place because can help reduce that uncertainty. Again, it's reasonable to discuss them candidly rather than leave the department guessing. Let's see. I'm not sure if I had it on here. The one other thing I wanted to mention in case I didn't put it directly on the slide, also be careful what you say. The profession is very small and we talk. And you might not know even how people are connected. So if you tell one place that I want to live in a big city and that's absolutely what I do, and you tell another place, I really want to live in a college town and that's the only place I want to go, and they talk, they're going to be like, well, you know, what is it? Is this person just telling us what we want to hear? Don't ever underestimate how small the profession is. I cannot emphasize that enough. And so the people are in the room are laughing like, yes, it is. Okay, so again, this is very much like writing the paper as well, right? If you're going to get practice as much as possible. And by that, I mean the first few minutes. You want to be really comfortable going in and discussing the first part of your paper and think about your transitions. Now, there's a trade-off. You don't want to come across as robotic, right? But you don't want to just stand there and be like, hey, these are the slides, and just read point by point from your slides either. So I think you can do a little bit of both. Again, to be ready to field questions on any part of your talk. I always like questions because I think that means that they're engaged and interested in my research. It also means, however, that maybe 40 minutes in, I'm on slide 3, so you have to manage that as well. And again, that for your presentation, you might want to make sure that early on you have a slide that has a summary of your results, so that in case you don't get to the details later on, they at least know the big picture. And I would say too, what can it take up too much time I think a common misstep is spending way too much time on the prior literature. I mean, like multiple slides, just kind of going over, here's what so-and-so did, here's what so-and-so did, here's what so-and-so did. There were a couple excellent presentations earlier today where people would say, here's what somebody found, here's a different result, and here's how I'm going to fill the gap. Those are great things to do. Now, again, that said, you should know the relevant literature in case somebody asks. But they're not there to listen about other papers. Again, stay composed under pushback. Let's say that somebody is really going after you aggressively, right? That can happen. You have to learn how to manage that process. You can do things like, you know, that's a great point. I'm going to have to think about it more. I'll circle back to you later. Or I think this is how this would play out based on what you're saying. And you can do those things. Do not get aggressive and show that you are flustered. Again, what can that signal? If you do that, maybe you wouldn't be a good colleague. You'd be somebody that would be quite disagreeable, difficult to work with. If you aren't receptive to feedback and pushback, maybe that means that you will never make your papers better and get it to the point of where it's going to be successfully published. Okay, and if you get if you get a dominating offer, from a school, it's okay to let them know, especially, again, if it's dominating. If you haven't visited, you're going to save them time and effort. During recruiting season, there's so many seminars, so nobody's going to be upset if they have one more free day on their schedule. So that's important to communicate as soon as possible, because if you're tying up the market and that school, they could lose out on their other candidates. Again, and this is the other point I made before, I said it's a small profession. Don't tell different schools different things. Okay, so the final 3 minutes that I have, I just want to talk about networking. So this can also be fed into the job market. When you go on the job market, you might find co-authors, right? You are also potentially going to be in a room with your future external letter writers. That's another topic, but external letters are extremely important when you're going up for tenure. The more they know you, the more likely they are to not only write a letter, but write a positive letter. Referee relationships. Again, reviewing and being reviewed by the same community builds mutual respect and visibility over the years. It's not just a short-run game, it's a long-run game. Again, I would say as much as you can, go to conferences, do seminars, become editors if that point arises. Definitely be discussants. You can really impress people in the room by giving a great, thoughtful, impactful discussion. So you want to craft your reputation. Again, so that's the point. Every interaction is a long run. I'm often surprised how in an interaction I might have had 3 or 4 years ago comes back to me in some way, invited to a great conference, getting a job offer. Hey, we know you, maybe we can do that. So be cognizant that everything that you do can come back. And show up at conferences and seminars. If you want to referee, volunteer to do that. I've had people do that to me. Oops, sorry. Volunteer to be a referee. So again, I think I'm right on time. Yes, with that. So I'd be happy to take any questions from the audience on this. Again, these are just my experiences. Other of my esteemed colleagues might have differing views on that. Yes.
So what is the most common mistake, faux pas, that you see students doing on the market? If you were to think like, or if you have some story of things that it comes to you and say, I've seen that, I wish they've done something different.
I think that I already mentioned one, which is being not receptive to questions and being quite aggressive. The other thing I have seen, without getting into too much detail, given that we are recorded, is I have seen people where they didn't know their paper as well as somebody in the audience did. So here I see that on your model you did this, and the person can't address that question adequately or explain what they did or why they did it. That, I think, is a killer right there. Yes.
Do you maybe have something to say about the difference between the US, Europe, and the interaction between things, given that sort of maybe people are thinking about going to Europe on the job market or to the US, to both? How does that work?
Well, I mean, I've never personally been on the European job market, although I interact a lot with them. I think it is very similar. My experience with talking to people is that Europe is even a smaller community of knowing each other. So I think that networking there is also critically important on that front. Obviously, one of the things that can now happen, for example, in the United States, is there's a lot more uncertainty around visas and work status. I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think people are very open to having people come in from Europe and other areas. Again, that's been expanding over time as well. Oh, yes.
I would actually follow up on what Audra say. I reduce asymmetric information. If you have a strong preference for the US, state it. If you have a strong preference for Europe, state it. Again, try to be honest. We are all trying to learn. If someone comes and say, I really, really, really want to go to the US, and then they get an offer from Europe, and then they stay in Europe, that's kind of creating, inefficiencies. So I think, having preference is okay. Stating the preference is okay. If you are indifferent, you are indifferent. If you have a marginal preference, it's a marginal preference. If you have a strong preference, it's a strong preference. It just you make the matching process more efficient. Sorry.
No, thank you for that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So it's my turn to talk about this publication process, which is, there is this old saying about publishing or perishing in this profession. So you need to publish, basically, rather than not publish. You start with a job market paper that you all have. Now you need to start to think how to publish it. So that is kind of one of the goals that you should have, is to try to publish these papers, ideally a series of papers. Ideally in a top journal, even though there is this idea that the point is to publish in a journal that will get you citations. There is this Financial Times 50 journal list that a lot of business schools, at least in various parts of the world, are looking at these days. That you should, that's one point of reference, just because it goes into various indicators of quote-unquote productivity. But there is this other idea that you should just read the paper and figure out whether the paper is impactful or not. And that's what most top departments do, actually. So whenever you go to tenure evaluations, even if you get a paper that is not in that list, people will understand whether it's a good paper or not. And that is what matters. So I can think of many papers, actually, that got published in top field journals that have a lot more citations than papers that get published in top 5 econ or top 3 finance journals. So bear that in mind. So it's so the point is to get the paper out the door. So even if the paper is not in a top journal, as long as the paper is cited, as long as people understand that it's a contribution, that's what you want. So it's important to get people, readers, to see the paper, because that's the only chance you will have for them to cite it, basically. So you need to go to conferences, present, talk to people, send it to the, you can even send it by email to some people, even if they will not respond, that's still, they will still know about the paper. I should say a lot of the things that we're all saying we have a bit of an overlap. So I will say some things, but I will use a different author when it comes to, he's also at Harvard though. So I guess Harvard is doing well in this. So now there's different ways to get published. And how do you do this? So I should say this is a really, I mean, you come to nice places when we do these conferences, and you have this idyllic way of how academia works, but it's really a lot of work. It's tough work, actually, that happens behind the scenes when nobody's watching. It's a tough profession because it's not easy to get published. Okay, so you should bear that in mind. So it's not, it's a tough process. So you should. So if you are not made to handle rejection, you should abandon ship early and find a job somewhere else. Okay, it's a tough. Everybody in all parts of their career. I just got a rejection this week. So everybody gets rejections. Okay, so whatever part of their life cycle, however junior, senior they are. So you need to, deal with that. Now, so how do you get people to see, maybe like the paper, and to things. And of course, some of the things that have been said before about practicing and going to conferences are important. Now, you know, and we are in Europe, and I should say that I spent, well, almost all my career in Europe, but now I'm in London. I used to be at LSE and now the Imperial, but I spent 6 years of my academic career in Cyprus at the university in Cyprus here in Nicosia. And the further away you are from the US, you know, realistically speaking, the tougher it is to get published, okay? So it used to be a time in the early 2000s when I was at LSE that people from London universities, LBS and LSE, used to send, it was a time when we had to mail the papers. So we had to, so many people, I remember one paper I had sent it to A4, which is what you use in the US basically to pretend that it's coming from the US academic institution, okay? So that's kind of, that's the level of things you can do. So what, how do you get over that additional kind of problem, if you want? So you need to get to the right conferences. So what are the most important? So, and we have limited resources, and we have limited time, and it's nice to be in Cyprus, and it is a good, where Spanayo is a very good conference actually to come and meet people. But you need to, you know, there are some conferences so are important, are more important than others. So if you manage to get into these conferences, that's quite good. But then getting in is the first step. Then you need to make sure you do a very good job in the presentation. And then when it comes to Q&A, because chances are in these conferences you're going to have a discussant, and chances are, because it is a small profession, as you know, what has been said before, I'm going to come back to it, emphasize this point, where it's a small profession, and when you go into a particular smaller subfield of a subfield, it gets even smaller. Chances are, if you are in a specialized conference in the US and you're presenting and you have a discussant, most likely the anonymous referee will be in the audience, if not everybody who will deal with your paper. So if you cannot answer the questions that come up, you know, you will have your referee report the next day, basically, and it will not be good. So you need to be able to do a good job, basically. So my experience, the best kind of conference that I think is good to get in, if you can, is the NBR Summer Institute. It happens every summer in Cambridge. They have different sessions. Not all fields are covered, but you know, nowadays a lot of fields are covered. Nowadays you can also, it used to be the case that you had to get the email somehow and you to get on their email list, but nowadays you can go and apply online, basically, and you have two choices of where you're going to submit the paper. So that's where I would go first. And then there's other conferences like that. So some of you came by from WFA, so, you know, but that's it's quite, you know, some conferences are quite tough to get in, and the paper has to be very well polished, so it's almost beyond it's already revised and resubmit somewhere, so that's not what you want to do. So one way is, if the paper gets into these conferences, then you have a good, and you do a good job, so this is kind of important, then you do this. Now you also, comments will come up in this comments and questions will come up, and not everything will be potentially addressed in those Q&A. You know, you might, even the discussant might have some points that, you know, I mean, it's research, it's not easy to think on your feet and address everything. So, so ideally you want to say something, but for sure you need to follow up with the people who ask the questions, and you know, and if you haven't addressed the questions well. So you need to address this. And of course, you know, a common mistake that I see with many of our students who are younger, they find a job somewhere, and then you ask them what happened to the job market paper, and they say, I'm still dealing with comments from 3 years ago. So that's a very bad mistake, okay? So you need to start the process, and the process starts by submitting, basically. So nothing will get published if it doesn't get submitted. So you need to start the process. it might be tough because, I mean, typically, I'll talk about this later, the papers get better, by the more rejections you have, actually, because there are some valid points that get raised, and then you address them, and then, the papers do improve, actually. So, I'll talk about it later, but I never had a paper, or very rarely had I had a paper get, published in the first journal I tried, basically. So, and I think that's a common experience. So, what if you have bad luck with conferences because you don't get into these conferences, which is also an issue. It could be dealing with the title. There's some details you need to address. So Alessandro mentioned the title. There could be other things. So not all of my papers have been presented at top conferences. So there are ways to get feedback by not getting, not everybody will have their papers at the NBR Summer Institute. Is very competitive to get in. There's other conferences out there. You need to get feedback, basically. So there are, what are the other ways? Well, you have colleagues. You have advisors, ideally, that can give you comments. Any comments you get, you need to be receptive to feedback. And then you need to, at some point submit, basically, and just start the process, basically. Now, what's the optimal time to submit? It's not easy to say how long are you going to wait, but you kind of get the feeling by the, if the same questions keep coming at you, then it means you need to address them. Basically, you need to say something. Now, rejection is some, it's a, you need to, it's quite actually, once you realize that it's part of the business and you need to deal with it, you can relax a bit. So, it's a part of, it's part of the job, basically. So it's kind of like smoothing the business cycle. So there's good times and then there's bad times. Okay, so you need to kind of smooth this out, and then you're going to have some good times where you get papers accepted, and then bad times where you get papers rejected. I mean, it might take you a few days to open the referee report and read the editor's letter, but I mean, it's kind of, it works like that, actually, for everybody. So if you, so most of my papers, at least, have been rejected the first time around. So what do you do? How do you proceed? And now, and then here it gets a bit tricky, because some comments are valid and some points are not valid, actually, in the sense that there's a huge heterogeneity and randomness in the referee comments you're going to get. And because the fields are small and you might get a theory referee when the paper is empirical, or vice versa, then you don't want to address the comments that should not be addressed, actually. So the one key question is to address or not to address the comments. Most of the time, you need to address the main comments that are important, and you will have a feeling about which comments are important and which not. And then note that because the profession is very small, do not say, oh, I'm going to just put the paper as it is and send it to another journal as it is, because chances are you are going to get the same referee. And if the comment was this was a typo and you didn't fix even the typo, you will get the rejection straight away, okay? Now, usually it's not just a typo, it's probably a more substantive issue. But even the most substantive issue, if you have completely ignored it and you get to the same person, at least you need to say something. Maybe I cannot do it because it's computationally tough, I cannot do it because identification doesn't work, I don't have the data, but you need to say something, okay? You cannot just ignore everything, because there is a chance, a high chance, because it's a small profession, that you get the same person, and they will not like it if you have completely ignored them. So, so what is the next journal? Let me see where, which is the next journal? So that's kind of tricky as well. You want to publish in the top journals, but then you have field journals as well. So you pick the journal typically also depending on the topic. Look at the editorial board, who are the people who are going to be likely to be referees, editors, what they might like or they might not like. So you need to basically have these FT rankings, the field journals, the editorial boards. Then the reputation for journals is important as well. You ideally want to have a speedy resolution of uncertainty because you are on a clock and the clock is ticking. Now, you will get a revise and resubmit at some point, or rejected and resubmit. There's different ways of calling it. Ideally, it's a revise and resubmit. So you need to respond to the invitation to an R&R. So you need to write these letters that nobody, we don't tell you that much in PhD programs, unfortunately, but you need to respond to these referees, and you need to respond to the editors. And a common mistake is to, instead of responding to what you are being asked, you just go on a tangent because you can do something and just start mumbling about something random, basically, because you can do it. And that will, upset everybody, basically, because that's not what you are being asked. So stay within the parameters of what you are being asked. So they tell you 10 points to address. You need to have a response letter, point by point, 10 points, and you write down what your response is, and then you decide strategically whether it's going to go into an online appendix or to the paper or just to a response to the referee, basically. So depending on how important these things are. And then sometimes you cannot do everything, so then you have to take some risk. It's a risky profession, it's very entrepreneurial, actually. So you have to take some risk. So you need to justify and explain why some requests cannot be done, okay? Because it will take me 20 years to run it on a machine, basically, if it's a computational thing. So you need to say that, okay? Now, you need to prepare at least 2 documents. So a reply to the referee. So ideally, I do it, if you have 3 referees, you do it 1 for each referee, and the reply to the editor. You need to give all these comments and suggestions serious thought. You need to respond to all the comments, even if you cannot do everything. By the way, these will be available online. We'll put them online on the website, so you can, so this will be publicly available. Now, address the comments and question in the paper, and make a reference to those in your reply. So, so these may include new data, new methods, new text. So, you do not have to do everything. If you disagree with something or think it's tangential, distracting, or simply beyond the scope of the paper, you can also say so. There is, ultimately, it is your paper. So I was at a conference once, so somebody that I will not name was, his paper was being discussed. So he was a very, he's actually quite a famous person by now, but his paper was being discussed. And the discussion was very eager. It was like, you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do this. The paper got up, and they responded by saying, I have sympathy with all the comments, and I encourage the discussant to follow up with them in their paper, because that's not my paper. Okay, so you could say that. It's a risky thing to say, but you could say that. Okay, if people are too eager. So there's also replication packages nowadays that we all have to do, and we spend a lot of time doing that. Website and CV need to be updated. That has been discussed already. In many universities, at least in the UK, you need to upload these papers, actually, because we have this research evaluation exercise. That's a UK-specific thing. It's good to post everything on SSRN. Now, in terms of more personal experiences, so this is kind of a bit kind of like going to a priest and telling them your sins. So the most cited paper that I have was rejected by a top econ journal before making it to the JF. Now, that was presented at good conferences, so I consider that a success. But even that paper was rejected, off the bat by a top journal. Now, one paper was never really presented at top conferences. That's actually, I was in Cyprus at the time, and was rejected by 2 of the finance journals, and then ended up at JFE. So it's also a decently cited paper. So it gives you an idea that this, but every time you have to, things come up and you need to address them, okay? You need to kind of figure it out. Now, very few of the papers that I have, including the ones in field journals, were published where they were originally submitted. So many rejections. So you need to get used to that, basically. I mean, it's, and I'm pretty sure this is common to all of us, actually. So the ones that had taken the most rounds are the ones where I did not understand what the referee had in mind or could not implement what they had in mind. So I had to take a risk, and that's what happens. I will not mention about how many years this takes. It takes many years, actually. So you have a paper now in this conference. do not be surprised if it takes 5 or 6, 7 years to get published. Okay, so it's kind of normal. Now, there is this saying that it's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So you need to sweat a lot in order to get things out there. So persistence is very important. It's not just writing prose. Rejections are part of the norm and happen to everyone. So do not get too depressed. So the editorial team is actually there to make the paper better because it's in their interest to have it well cited. Now, one thing I would say also about my kind of favorite author that I would, which is a good suggestion to go and look at the introduction of how they write papers. It's not André Schleifer. Well, it could be André Schleifer, but in my case, it's John Campbell. So if you go to John Campbell, and especially if you do, like there was a paper today on present value, you can go and look at how he writes the introduction. So so John Campbell would be the person to take a look at. So that's all I had actually. So any questions, comments, or concerns?
So you mentioned that like one of the things to do is to go to good conferences, and that might actually help the paper. I was wondering, like, how can we actually like recognize a good conference? Is that because there are like academics that are affiliated with good institutions? Is that because
So that's a tricky, that's a good question. I mean, there's some conferences that are very prestigious because they have a history behind them. Other conferences like FMARC are trying to build reputation. So I'm sure Panagiotis will mention how many papers got published in the JF that got prizes here, and they have doing well. And so and the smaller conferences are good because you always meet people that are, and meeting people is a good thing. Actually, for the job market, it's a good thing. For future potential job opportunities, editorial responsibilities, so things like that. But there are some big, well-recognized conferences that are very good. So I think, personally, I put the NBR Summer Institute up there because it has all these subfields, basically. So all the people who work in this particular subfield are there. So if you're doing corporate finance or asset pricing, or if you're doing household finance, or so there's different sessions, different subgroups in that group. And then once you're there, you can if you see a paper in another session, you can go to that other session as well. So you meet a lot of good people if you had the £2,000 to spend, that's the return on investment in terms of time and in terms of money would be very high there. Now there's a few other conferences as well. Of course, like you could mention. Let me not mention because I'll get in trouble, I guess. But so let's focus on that basically. But there's a proliferation of conferences, and you always get something from any conference you go to, actually. But then, because there's a proliferation, there is a constraint on your time and on money, actually. So both bind, because time, people have families, they have kids, they have, so they have other responsibilities. It's not easy to, There's a famous story of a professor who decided for a whole year to go to not, he didn't get a rental agreement because he could go to conferences for the year round, basically. So you can do that if you want, basically. But that's, that's a different lifestyle, I guess, if you are, so ideal, you need to get the return on investment from the main ones. You get also that with experience, you get more. And also sometimes, you go to the ones that accept your paper as well. So it's a very practical.
How can we spot the next best academic journals, except from the top 3, for example, that are already known?
I mean, so the question about the next best, what are the journals that are coming up, and there's always these citation impact factors that come up every year, and it's become a business actually by different private companies actually that do these rankings of different universities. Now, it's. I mean, the important thing is to get published, ideally by somebody who knows the area. Basically, if they know the area and they like the paper and they put it, and the paper gets cited, it's in the interest of the journal actually. So a lot of journals these days, try to solicit papers with that view. Even the top journals actually, they try to solicit papers so that they can increase the citation impact factor, because they have that, it reflects good or bad on the editorial board, on the editor. So everybody is trying to get good papers out there. So the important thing is to actually get a paper that is good, and that people, the referees, the discussants that will discuss it, you address their points basically. And then if that happens, I would worry, if it goes to a field journal as opposed to a top journal, okay, people, deans look at this. The citations are very important as well. So you should be pragmatic about it. The citations are important. Okay. Thanks.
All right. So I'm excited to go last. My topic is making research impactful. And I don't know how you're feeling right now, but at this point, you might be a little bit stressed. You have to write a really well-written and compelling paper. There's this job market looming in front of you that's going to make or break your career, potentially. Not really, it'll work out. But then you also have to actually publish, and whew, that sounds hard. And how many times are we going to get rejected? And now I'm coming up here and telling you how to make research impactful. At this point, you're probably thinking, look, if I can get anything done, I'm pretty good. The reason I'm excited to go last is that if you can do this, all of those other pieces are going to be so much easier, right? If you have an impactful paper, the writing is going to flow. That job market, people are going to be interested. And that editorial board and the reviewer, it's going to be a lot easier to convince them. Now, the other piece that you might be thinking about is this topic, it feels like a topic for the senior author, right? Aren't they the ones making sure that this is going to be impactful? And you're a PhD student or a junior faculty member. Should you be thinking about this yet? Absolutely. So first of all, you have your dissertation. That one you definitely need to think about this for. But even for your co-authored work, even if you're the most junior author on a team of 4 authors, I want you to be thinking about this and keeping it in mind in everything that you're doing. And I'm going to go through and show you how that's going to make you stronger as a researcher and make all of the work that you do, honestly, a lot more fun. All right, so let's get into it. The starting point here is just that we're very lucky to get to do what we do, right? Think about what we actually are doing with research. We literally get to ask questions that we find interesting and spend our time trying to figure out the answers. We get to keep learning and building new knowledge for our entire careers, and we get paid to do it. I don't know if you've ever tried to describe that job to a non-academic. Most people can't believe that even exists. Right? We are extremely fortunate. But there's a reason that we get to do that. There's a reason that nonprofits, that governments, that institutions support academia and allow us to do this. It's because they believe that the research and the knowledge that we generate is going to help society. If it doesn't, we might not get to keep doing this, right? We are given an incredible privilege, but in return, we have a duty to make sure that our research actually is impactful. And so that's the starting point I want to give you. Now, I'm going to give you a framework for how to think about this, but I just want to cite some of the other work that's out there. And I have learned a lot from these. I encourage you to go look these up afterwards and read them. And there's going to be more, I'm sure, all the time. Right? But these three in particular are extremely helpful. The framework I'm going to show you is my own, but it does draw ideas from all of these. So this is the framework I'm going to give you. Now, this is 20 minutes to talk about how to make research impactful. And I'm giving you this particular framework with these 5 steps. Every single one of these steps, we could probably spend a good hour on. So what I'm going to try and do is give you a few key pointers on each of these. And those will give you a framework as you're going through and doing your own research to think about this and to move forward with it. But this can't be all that you do, right? This is the starting point. So let's get into it. All right, our first one, ask an important research question. All right, think about it for yourselves for a second. How would you even decide if your research question is important? The one that you're thinking about looking at. I'm not going to ask you to actually answer. I'll give you my framework. So I was fortunate to do my PhD at Stanford and start my career at Harvard. And those were both, I had advisors and senior faculty members at both places that really put a huge emphasis on making sure that your research question was extremely important. And they had slightly different but overlapping ways that they looked at it. I learned from both of those, and this is the way that I synthesize those in my mind. So the first part is you need to make sure that there are actually going to be people interested in this question, other than just yourself. Okay? But go beyond just the researchers. Think about whether practitioners would be interested. And depending on your research, I want to emphasize here, there's a wide range of topics or methodologies that can all be important. Okay? And so depending on your research, maybe those practitioners are, in my case for some of it, sell-side analysts. Or maybe they're individual investors. Or maybe they're banks. Or maybe they're regulators. Right? It might be different depending on what you're looking at. But make sure that there are people, not just researchers. There should definitely be a good number of researchers interested, but also people outside of research who would be interested if you could explain it to them in the right way. Okay? They're not necessarily going to read your paper, but the question itself should be interesting to them. And then the other piece that I would say is ask yourself, is this question, this topic, interesting even absent the existing literature? And the reason I say that is that especially as PhD students and junior faculty, we can often anchor on the existing literature a little bit too much, right? We're looking at, okay, paper A and paper B have done these things, so I'm going to do paper C, which kind of combines paper A and paper B, and nobody's done that. But maybe paper A and paper B are about something that's kind of been settled now, and the world has moved on. And that topic is no longer as interesting as it was. You want to think about, even absent the literature, is this topic right now, is this interesting? Okay, so that's one thing you have to ask yourself. But you also have to do the flip. And I tend to go the other way around. I tend to have questions inspired by what I'm seeing in the world around me, what I'm reading in the news, things like that. And so question 2, I tend to be okay on that. I have to make an effort to make sure I'm really thinking about the existing literature carefully. Because the flip side is it might be extremely topical and extremely interesting inherently. But you know what? Realistically, there's enough other work that's relevant and that provides insight to that your research question is not that interesting. So think of these as 3 different angles, and really what you want is all 3 of these. Who? There's a good number of people who would be interested. It's inherently interesting, and it's interesting even given existing literature. All right, so you've asked an interesting and important research question. I'm going to give you a little bit more context just from my own dissertation. So I was doing my dissertation work in the early 2000s, and I was in the Bay Area. I had done electrical engineering and computer science undergrad. Everyone I knew was going and working for a .com, and it was amazing, getting tons of stock options, investing, and they all lost a ton of money. These were really smart people who lost a lot of money, in some cases, everything that they had saved. In some cases, money they didn't even have because they were trading on margin. I was in this environment and had a lot of questions about why. I had to push myself, though, to tie back to the literature and really make sure that I was grounding my questions in what was happening at the time. Right? And this was a time where behavioral finance was definitely growing, but still highly controversial. And so I'm looking at these models that amazing, smart people have come up with to explain momentum and mean reversion. And I'm looking at experimental work that seems to have mixed findings about whether those underlying behavioral biases would actually impact investing. I could have said, okay, let me do experiment C, because experiment A showed this and experiment B showed this. That would not have been all that exciting. What I did was try and do a different methodology to try and bring that together and contribute to this larger discussion. But this is what I really want to highlight. It took me about 25 ideas before I got to these 2 wonderful papers. You're going to have a lot of ideas that you have to reject. You want to reject them fast and early so that you can get to those ones that actually have the most potential and spend your time working on those. So over 6 months, I went to my advisor every 2 weeks with 2 ideas. And he rejected most of them. But he helped me think through why. I got better and better at rejecting them myself, and eventually got to an idea that he couldn't reject. All right, now we have to actually do the work. We have the idea. This is what I would recommend on doing the work. Approach it with intellectual curiosity. What does that mean? That means you're trying to actually learn. Right? The intellectual curiosity means you're trying to truly find the answer, not I have a prediction and I want to find the evidence that supports my prediction, but you're truly trying to learn, and with academic integrity. All right, so if you're trying to get to the real answer to the question, all of those things that we normally think about, strong research design, careful execution, robustness, all of those are there, just like they normally would be. But what I want you to remember is that the underlying reason we're doing all of that is to find the real answers, right? It's to answer this important question, to find the truth, to contribute knowledge. If you approach it with that mindset, your research is going to be more impactful. All right, so we're going to do that. And then this is the point that I want to make, because here's the problem. If you're approaching it with true intellectual curiosity and true academic integrity, there are going to be times where you realize I can't answer it. Or the answer looks like it's all over the place. Or, it's not as exciting as I thought. Be willing to drop projects. Just like I want you to reject ideas that maybe are not as strong as you originally thought, be willing to drop projects. And I've got 2 examples for you on that one. The first one is, I'm going to keep this one very generic because I don't want to reveal too many details. But I started a project with a couple of really big name people when I was an assistant professor. Right? I went to them with an idea. They were excited about it. We started working on it. The reality was, results weren't that strong. Now, I could have found the subset of the data and the specific instances where it showed up, and maybe we could have gotten something out of it, and I would have had this paper with these big name people, but the reality is it really wasn't that strong. I was very honest about it. We ended up dropping the project. I have a strong reputation with them now. It turns out that they respected me more as an assistant professor for being honest about it and dropping the project than they would have if I had really just pushed with weak results. And I'm pretty sure one of them ended up being a letter writer when I went up for tenure. So that's a nice little side benefit. My other example is a little more concrete because these papers are out there, so I can give you some specifics. Sunk cost fallacy. It's hard to drop a paper. And so this is an example of a working paper that I have. It's up on SSRN. It actually has 47 citations. Pretty darn well cited for a working paper that will never get published. And you'll notice it's posted in 2008, right? In 2008, this was really interesting. Let's dig into local media. How are investors using it? What is local media doing for the information environment? Spoke to local bias. We were so excited about our wonderful working paper. Except that Engelberg and Parsons published this. Now, obviously the papers are different. And yes, we have stuff in our paper that isn't in theirs. One of the PhD student papers presented earlier today actually cites my working paper, which I really appreciate. But the reality is the potential contribution of our paper just wasn't that big anymore. And so we dropped it. But dropping that allowed me to move on to this. Okay, we know the newspaper is important. We're in the internet era. In the internet era, I can look up the Boston Globe when I'm in California. I can look it up from Cyprus. So let's look at that. And this was the first paper where I was the senior author. And it was published by the time I went up for tenure, and it showed that I could have that leadership role. And I probably wouldn't have had the time or capacity to take on this project if I had stuck with that geographic location one. So be willing to move on. All right, now I spent most of my time on the first two pieces, but that was somewhat intentional because the third one is really just about presenting your research. And those of you who are here, you're doing that. Good job. But I do want to emphasize that presenting really is about the iterative improvement, right? And that came out in the last presentation here. So remember to keep that in mind. It is an important element. These are a few tips for having a strong presentation. And I just wanted this to be on a slide for you. But just so you know, I actually teach an entire course on this topic. There's so much to presenting well. Treat it as a skill, just like writing, that you're going to continue to work to develop, right? Practice it, be thoughtful about it, and continue to work on it. And think about this feedback loop, right? The research question, the careful design, the writing, the presentation, and the feedback you're getting, it all feeds back to make the research stronger. Now you do all of that, and then finally you're going to try and publish it. And both of these are kind of happening simultaneously, right? You're presenting, you're submitting, you're revising, an entire separate presentation on that. So I don't have to spend much time on it. Here's my last key piece. This is a slightly newer aspect, I would say, to what we're doing as researchers. There have always been some people who do this, but many who don't. We often think once you've published it, that's it, right? The people who are interested, they're going to go and find it. It's not true. And especially when we think about having that real impact, those other people, the practitioners, all of those people who might be interested in it, they're not going to understand the paper that we publish in a journal. So think about translational work. Think about how you make it accessible to people. Some of this is easy. Direct outreach. You just published a paper, it got accepted, it's forthcoming, right? First of all, it might not even appear in the journal for 2 years. But second, the people who are interested, they looked at it when it got posted on SSRN and they're not going to look at it again, right? You heard that earlier today. Send it to them. I know for me, in my roles, I don't have the time to keep up on everything, but if you send it to me, I'm going to appreciate that. LinkedIn posts. It's super simple, but you can do it. Now this is something, this entire category that I'm really working on myself. I'm not very good at this. but I'm trying to get better. So think about this as well, disseminating and promoting it. And you'll be surprised, the feedback you get through this process will often help lead to that next paper. Because again, you start to hear what people are thinking, what questions they're asking, all of that. It's an incredibly helpful piece of doing impactful research. So, to summarize, just remember that impact is the reason we do this. We do research to have impact. So how do we do that? These 5 steps. Thank you. I think we have a little time for questions.
Thank you very much. I have a question regarding dropping the project.
Yeah.
I fully appreciate your advice on drop it and move on. But there is also another argument says no result is sometimes some results. And of course, I know that nowadays to publish a paper on some kind of no result or weak result will be very, very harsh, very, very difficult. But my question is between turn around the paper or drop the paper and move on, and maybe try to push that no result or weak result paper to a lower ranked journal, which one would you recommend, especially for the younger or earlier career stage researchers?
Every paper, including going to the lower ranked journal, takes a huge amount of time, right? That's the reality. Publishing research takes a huge amount of time. And so you can only take on so many projects. Think about the opportunity cost, right? Yes, I have this working paper, and yet, or no result, or whatever it is. I can go and try and publish this in a lower ranked journal, but by doing so, I'm unable to take on other projects. What is that opportunity cost? The trade-off's going to be different for everyone. And I will say, I think looking back at my own career, I pushed a little bit too hard in I want top tier publications and I'm not going to go to the lower tier journal, right? Maybe I should have sometimes gone ahead and done that. But I'm happy with the overall balance that I did. I'd rather have the more impactful publications and a few more dead projects than a CV of not very impactful work.
Just to add on the point, I think if you ask academics that publish quite a bit, none of them will tell you, "Oh, I regret I killed too many projects." Like that's the one thing that everybody always regrets, not killing enough projects. And I know early on you feel like, "Oh, I have this idea. If I kill it, an idea is never going to come back to me." No, that's not the way. But then I think going back to what I was saying before, you shouldn't have written a paper that has a no result or is very weak. So sometimes when I meet, especially like with other coders on teams, and we think that the idea is not good enough, we just keep thinking more than just writing the paper and then figuring out where. Because I second what Devon was saying, I think it doesn't take 1/4 or 1/10 of the time to publish in a lower tier journal. You're still going to go through a referee process. You're still going to get very good referee, and they're still going to try to make the paper better because lower tier journals are trying to get better. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, I think it's, spend more time before actually executing the paper to make sure that this paper has potential. If you already know that this is not going to make it to a top 3 or top 5 or top 10, move on. Because if you doubt that it's going to make it to a top whatever ranking you care, your institution care, then I think it's not worth the effort. And so maybe I'll be a bit too extreme, but.
Yeah. And you'll notice that I said drop ideas that don't have the potential to be strong and drop kind of in process, right? So part of this is almost, you want to drop it earlier rather than later. You don't want to make the opposite mistake and just kind of keep investing. Now, I had an entire lunchtime conversation about how you generate new ideas that are strong ideas, right? And we can talk a lot about that, but that might be the flip side. If what you find is, well, okay, but the reason I'm nervous to let this go is I don't have more ideas. instead of investing in that one project, maybe invest in other ways to generate ideas, right? And we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, I was wondering, so you mentioned that sometimes PhD students sort of combine two papers, and really what has happened is the literature's moved on.
Yeah.
I think that's great, but how do you get to the notion of it? Because I think especially as a young person at the beginning of this, that's a hard call to make.
All right, so first of all, get advice, right? You will not and absolutely should not just in isolation come up with your dissertation topic and write your dissertation. You should be getting advice. And so you should be going to people with, this is my idea, right? I have the 3-page write-up, or the 2-page, or the 1-page. This is the idea, this is why I think it would be important, this is how I would tackle it, this is some of the related work that's out there, but this is how I think I would contribute. And your faculty will give you feedback, right? And to be clear, you should keep doing this even when you are a professor. This is not just for students. Even for me, I will brown bag things early. I will talk to people about ideas. Now, you want to be careful who you're talking to about ideas, because now all of a sudden they might have a similar idea. But get feedback early. I would say that's one of the key pieces. Others? All right. And just one final comment then. I want to emphasize, research is so exciting. It is such a privilege that we get to do this. And so just keep that in mind, right? As you're doing your work, it can be intimidating, it can get frustrating. There's times where it's hard. But when you think about what we're trying to do, it's also very exciting. Thank you.
So we can move now to the general Q&A session. I'll ask if there are some questions that came through the live YouTube link, or if there are questions in the audience. And you can ask questions to any or all of us. So while we get settled, I do have one. And so the question is to my fellow commenters here, what's the one thing you're going to bring back home from this session? Either something inspiring or a sour note. And I can go first. I still have Alex's message clear in mind. You never publish a paper that you don't submit. Guilty as charged. I have way too many papers that are not even posted. Yeah, that's a sour note. That's so just saying that, we are still striving to be better researcher, to have more impact, to become, and you never, the beauty of our job, I think, at least for me, is like, I continue to learn every day, and I don't think in many professions you can say that after you've been around for 20 years, that you still learn. So that was for me. So sour note, but hopefully there are some more inspiring message.
One, I just want to say that you can start to see common themes across what we're saying, so try to take some of that together. But kind of echoing what you said, I always like to learn from my fellow academics, and I will give a shout out to Devin here and some of our earlier points where we were meeting with the PhD students and giving feedback, I really liked the way that she gave the feedback, kind of talking more generally about what makes the research impactful. And so for me, I'm going to take away how to give better discussions that are more like what she did.
Thank you. All right, I'll give mine. So you might not guess it from my presentation, but I'm an introvert and I'm horrible at networking. So when I'm at a conference, I have the hardest time going up to people and introducing myself or talking to them. And so for me, the tips on networking, the kind of concrete suggestions, things like emailing a comment if you're uncomfortable about saying it during the actual talk, those are things that I'm definitely going to take away. And I will say I jotted down notes from all of the presentations. There's definitely takeaways. But for me, because the networking is so hard for me, those tips will be very helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess for me, it's good to remember that it is a bit of a privilege, as Devin said, to do this work, actually. So it's very hard. When I was in Cyprus, my grandfather used to say, it's summer now, let's go, what are you doing? I was like, I'm at the university. I was like, what do you mean? Come to the field. There's a question here.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for all your suggestions and advices. This was very, very helpful. I have a question maybe more for Alex and Evan, but like for everyone that might actually want to add anything. So I was trying to combine a bit your two presentations, right? And I mean, I always try to think about like research questions that potentially could be impactful. And you did mention, try to think about researchers, but tried also to think about practice or regulators and so on. And then I think also about journals and about publishing in top journals maybe. Sometimes it is kind of difficult to have, like to actually publish maybe even impactful questions that are very relevant for practice, but maybe aren't super identified well, because there is this new trend to like have the perfect identification strategy and everything. So how do you deal with that?
I'll give my perspective. So I do think that you almost have to take a portfolio approach, right? So let's say there's a general research question that you're very interested in, so I'm doing work on AI right now, right? And a lot of people are. But my background from electrical engineering, computer science, plus finance and behavioral finance and psychology, right? I have a unique take on it, and I think I can contribute. But it's almost impossible to identify AI-related effects. Like, there's no exogenous variation here. On the one hand, there are certain regulatory changes, or there's the introduction of a new model, but is it truly... It's an important enough topic that I'm going to pursue it, but I'm going to pursue it with multiple methodologies. I'm going to, caveat it appropriately, and I'm going to do what I can. And I think because it's so important, journals will still be receptive, right? And I am making some progress there. On the flip side, I'll have papers that maybe it's not quite as new of a topic, but it's still relevant. And there, maybe I have that better identification and what I can contribute there. So some of my work on analyst incentives, for example, exploiting changes like MiFID II. Right there, I have a really nice clean setting to address a very classic question about how analyst incentives drive behavior. So I think you need a mixture within your portfolio, your pipeline, of kind of how the different approaches you're taking, also how risky the topics are. I have topics related to diversity, anti-ESG, that a lot of people will find very controversial. And even my early work at the time, now it's not, right? But at the time was somewhat controversial. If you're doing work that's somewhat controversial, that probably shouldn't be 100% of your papers, right? So you want a few that are a little bit less.
So there is this like a slight well-spotted kind of conflict divergence between what Devin said and what kind of I said. So which is, one approach is if it's not in the top 3 finance journal, stop bothering it, and you could, if we're brutal, let's say in the, that's one approach, and the other approach is be a bit more elastic, and then you can, there's journals below the top 3 that you keep trying to publish. Now, the decision I think there depends very much on your life cycle stage in your career, where you are. There's many universities out there that will happily take a well-cited paper that it's and even top universities. There's Nobel Prize winning papers that are in field journals actually. Like anyway, you can give examples. So because there's only 3 journals and the space has been fixed for the last whenever like 50 years there. The same for economics. Same space. In finance, it's more extreme now because economics has started all these offshoots of journals exactly to deal with that problem. But you have 3 journals, and the profession is like a multiple of what it was before. So, realistically, it's become a lot harder. So then, okay, if you are told that you're at a university, you're trying to get tenure, and you're told you have to have, they say we read papers, but of course it's also, they say we have 4 or 5 top 3 journals in 6 years. You have to spend your time accordingly. But if it's a topic that you care about and you're already tenured, and and the paper will be cited, even if it has these small extra, problems, So that's kind of, it's a bit tricky. It's not.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to I want to clarify something, because I don't want the impression to be, when I say research should have impact, it should be of interest to people, and it should be important, that means it has to go to the top 3. Right? You could have extremely impactful research that goes to, let's say, a practitioner journal, right? And I mentioned in that last piece about the translational pieces. And so the key here is about having that impact. So if that paper going to a different journal is going to be well cited, the reason it's being well cited is it's actually impactful. What should be willing to drop are the papers where you realize you're not going to learn much from it, and the world is not going to learn much from it. And there, regardless of which journal it ended up in, it wouldn't get cited much, right? It wouldn't have much impact. And I think that's the key. The key is not necessarily the outlet. The outlets, you do need to consider where you are and what you're supposed to be targeting. Like that factors in. But think about the impact and the importance of the research, regardless of the outlets.
Just a couple of sentences that come to mind. Citation from 2 very successful academics. One is, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. I know it's hard, like you're a PhD student, you want to get a job, but remember, it's a marathon. And the other one, which was more positive outlook, the cream always rises to the top. I heard this also from someone, great researcher. What I'm trying to say here is, if you build a reputation as a serious researcher, and you write a paper that is less well identified than you usually do, people are gonna still read the paper, because they're gonna still say, they know you write stuff that they can understand, they trust your integrity, your approach, and they know they can learn something. And don't be afraid of caveat. It's important. Just, if we want to be honest, unless you're running a field experiment, and also those now, they have their own caveats, we can't claim causality. We all strive to, but you can't. A smart economist is going to find where to poke holes. Just be open and acknowledge it. And what Damon was saying before, I say to a student today, if the question is interesting enough, the journal, the editor are going to cut you some slack, but this doesn't mean that you should lower the bar. If you have evidence that is not perfectly causally identified, use a battery of strategies. Show the editor, show the referee that you tried your best. And they cannot possibly ask anything more of you. Not just settle for the first strategy that comes to mind. And if I see 3, 4 different empirical strategies that all yield the same results, and none of them is perfect, and you tell me that none of them is perfect, you are going to win me over. Because I know that you thought about the limitation, you understand the limitation. So, if you don't write down the limitation, I'm going to assume that you don't know there is a limitation. And that is not going to go well, if I'm a referee, if I'm a reviewer. But if you acknowledge it, and then you say, that's what I can do, then the question is the contribution big enough that at least I wouldn't hold it against you, and I don't know.
And just for coming up with research ideas, I often get ideas from lawyers or legal journals. So they're often more attuned to what's going on in practice, but they might sort of have anecdotal evidence or a few examples, and then perhaps we can bring our more econometric knowledge, data knowledge to bear to bring broader evidence to that question. Regulators, that's another important point. What is the SEC looking at, or the Fed? What are their concerns that they're trying to address? Can you help give evidence on that? So those are some things that I have done along those lines to come up with ideas. I've also come up with ideas just from reading SEC documents. Some of my own research was just stumbling across the information that was in these documents and exploiting that nobody had known to do before, that allowed us to address questions that previously one couldn't without that data.
Okay, thanks so much for these insightful discussions. And I have one question. I'm not a doctoral student, but I'm just wondering the following. We live in an era where AI, is everywhere, including academic research. So let's assume that a doctoral student is about to start their research period, and I'm sure that they will be eager to jump on what is the impact of AI on employability, what is the impact of AI on stock valuations, just to understand whether AI is going to have any kind of implications about finance, accounting, or economics question. But usually there is this hype about the topic, and if you're a PhD student, it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years until you reach the point where you're going to have a solid paper that you're going to advertise, you're going to pursue a job position, and so on. So where do we find the balance, right? Once we live something new happens in the world that changes the finance, accounting, and economics landscape, where do we find the balance? Where do PhD students find the balance? Should they always go after what is new, or should also think what is traditional questions, and maybe we can find new ways to test them and so on? I mean, you understand it's quite broad what I'm asking here, but I think it's quite interesting.
I can start. So I mean, what we tell our, for better or for worse, what we tell our students now is to use, I guess Claude is the preferred kind of AI agent we use, and you can use it. We pay their subscriptions, so you can use it as a tool to understand papers faster, replicate papers faster. Use it for coding, use it for econometric techniques. So all of those are tools basically. AI makes it faster. So, but then the key idea, the big research question that was emphasized before, still remains, so you can get things done faster, and maybe we'll go back to a regime where PhDs lasted 4 or 5 years again, which is a good thing actually. But then the idea, you need to find the idea. So it doesn't have to be just how AI affects things. So the key ideas I think will still remain the same. The question is, how do you find them? How do you stop the bad ones, which is a very tricky, it's easier said than done to say, kill the bad ones, because, by the nature of research, we don't know which ones are the bad ones. So it's kind of a tricky thing. But the tools are there, and they're, I can see it on PhD students, and sometimes in a negative way, because if you haven't figured it out, you'll figure it out that if you even difficult problem sets, you put them up, Claude can actually find good answers in PDF very fast, actually, 5 minutes. So the problem with that is that then you go to the exam and you have no clue of what you're being asked. So there's tricky things that come up that we're trying to figure out. As a tool, I think it's useful, but then the key ideas, I think you still have to come up with them.
So Anthropic actually published, they are being very open about a lot of the negative effects of AI, right? And so there was early work that came out of people using AI to help generate ideas, and you can generate more ideas faster, amazing. And Anthropic followed teams that were doing that. After a while, the ideas became much less innovative, much less diverse. You essentially had the same set of ideas just being generated again and again and again and again by all of the teams that were using it. Despite the fact that they were trying to prompt it in different ways and they're trying to blah, blah, it actually makes it worse. Now, why do I give that specific example? For 2 reasons. Number one, you need to be very careful in your own usage of AI to make sure that you're only using it as a tool to assist you and you're not trying to replace your own thinking, your own building of knowledge. Because if you do that, you are essentially outsourcing yourself. No one is going to want a professor anymore if all we do is produce the same thing that an AI would. So be very careful about that. But that also brings up the fact that there are going to be so many research questions that are important about the impact that AI has. So now if investors, institutional investors, information intermediaries are using AI, well, on the one hand, it might help them. It might increase productivity. It might allow them to do things that they couldn't do before. And on the other hand, in the longer run, maybe the quality goes down. What impact is it going to have on hiring, on career development? There's so many things that it could impact, and there are probably a lot of important research questions. Now, none of what I just described is X equals function of AI. If what you're doing is putting in an AI indicator and seeing whether dependent variable A or B or C varies with respect to that, that's not the meaningful research that really helps us learn, right? So I think it's the same type of issue that happens with anything new. You might see the initial papers look kind of like that and you think, oh, I can just use a different variable. Don't. But if you're interested in this and you're really, truly trying to deeply understand it and think about how it's going to impact finance and accounting in the ways that are important, you'll probably be able to come up with research that won't be superseded in 3 years, right? Because you have a unique and important take on it.
Hello, and thank you for your very important advice. My question is a bit theoretical because I'm now starting the research phase. I was wondering what parameters define a stronger productive relationship between the PhD student and their supervisor. From your experience, what is a common mismatch? At what stages should a student approach their supervisor for guidance? And what is the right balance between autonomy and seeking guidance? I'm sure that last one changes throughout the years and throughout the phase of the PhD, but I was wondering what your expertise on this would tell us. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can get started. Lots of questions, lots of interesting questions, matching with your own advisors. So I think the way I recommend my PhD student to think about the relationship with the advisor think about creating your steering committee. Not just, an advisor, one person is key, but ultimately you would need 3 people to write you letters. And then once you start looking at this in a portfolio logic, maybe you want to have there an advisor that push you a bit. An advisor there that maybe cuddle you when you are down. Or an advisor that might work as a commitment device. If you know that you have some strengths and weaknesses, try to leverage both. So try to select the people that match you the best in terms of also some type of personal characteristics, some people that could complement or can help you, leverage your strength and also overcome your weaknesses. That's in terms of the matching. The other thing that I would say, I've interacted quite a bit with PhD students. I've been the coordinator of the PhD program at Indiana for 3 years. Most of the time, the complaint I hear from faculty is that they give comments to PhD students, and then these comments don't get implemented. The students disappears. So, if I'm a faculty member and I'm spending time reading your paper, and then I give you comments, my expectation is that you follow through those comments. So going back to your original question, how early? As soon as you can. How often? As often as you can. So I see that sometimes the students, especially when they're doing well, they're always at your door. But when they're doing poorly, they tend to disappear, and that's the worst mistake you can make. Because 1, 5, 10 minutes conversation with the right person could save you a huge amount of time. You have an idea, find the expert in your department, the idea, go there and say, I have this idea, does it make sense to you? Chances are the person would have read hundreds of papers in that setting. You can spot on if this has already been done, and they might save you months. So there is a balance between being respectful of the time of the faculty, but also thinking I'm just gonna go to the faculty when I have the polished SSRN version of the paper. Because it takes a village to get a PhD students a good job. So, and people, what we were saying before, you hire assistant professor to tenure them. You admit PhD students to get them a great job. That's why you do it. You invest a lot of time and resources on PhD students. So you're not doing this and then you don't care. You really care. But that's the point, take advantage of all the resources that are there. Again, you rather want to be known as the person is always at someone's door than the person that has disappeared for a year.
I just want to reemphasize the incorporating things. When we mentioned before about resubmitting a paper without making any changes, there's nothing that will upset a referee or an editor that is the case. And so the same thing there. And in terms of the working with people, I want to give it a slightly different perspective. So go back to the job market when hiring. You're going to have 3 letters from people that supposedly know you really well. So as I'm reading, there's a couple things I think of. One is if you are in a topic, like say mergers and acquisitions, which is my area, and you're not working with the person I know well at your university in mergers and acquisitions, they're not on your committee, I'm gonna wonder why. Did they think that your research wasn't good, or were you not taking feedback and therefore you had to default to somebody else? But also in the letters, a lot of times you can tell that that person hasn't interacted with that PhD student much. And they can just say, hey, here's this paper, you can see their advisor for more information. So the more that you can interact with them and show them how you're growing intellectually and thinking of ideas, the more positive that letter can be.
I think they've covered the important points, and so I'm just going to add a very minor one, but I think it's an important practical one, and it took me way too long to learn this. Be very proactive in your communication with the faculty and follow up. Now that I am on the other side and I realize I get 100 emails in my inbox every day, there's a decent chance that if a PhD student emails me, I forget to respond to them because I look at it and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to respond to that later when I have a little more time. And that never happens. And then it drops out of the top of my inbox and I don't see it anymore and I forget, right? If they don't follow up with me, they're going to think, oh, Devin, she just doesn't like my work, or she doesn't want to work. I don't know what's happened. No, it fell out of my inbox. Please send me the follow-up. Same thing as when you're dealing with the faculty. Just follow up, be proactive, and it's not pestering them. It's actually helpful to do that.
Nothing to add. Yeah.
Thank you very much for all of your advice. I actually have a question regarding the job market and the interview, but I would appreciate any comments from the panel. What are the main differences between interview of a assistant professor position and the interview of a postdoc or research fellow position, and how do we tailor for each of these kind of interviews?
Well, I mean, there's less information asymmetry, for one. So you're asking whether or not if you've been out, right? A non-rookie? Is that what you're asking me? Or maybe
no.
I misunderstood.
Just if you were to be interviewed for a postdoc position instead of an assistant professor.
Oh, okay. I need to think about that. Does anybody else want to start then?
I'm happy. I think it's you wanna. I'm gonna be straight. You wanna have a good reason of why you didn't get a job, because everybody knows that the job market didn't work well for you, and so you wanna be very proactive in being honest and saying that's what happened to me, that's my long-term plan, but also a postdoc, and I've been a postdoc myself, that changed my life. But a postdoc is a person that needs to create strong enough relationship with the people at the new institution and be open to, if the institution is hiring someone to do a work in a certain area, you don't want to show up and say, no, I'm going to continue to do my stuff. You want to be a team player. Ultimately, your goal is 2 years later, 3 years later, you want to have a slightly different pipeline when you go back on the job market, and you want to have someone at that institution that writes you a letter. So those are your goals at the end of the process. At the beginning of the process, just be honest. Tell them what happened, but also tell them why you think you are a good fit for the role. Because typically postdoc position, they have funding for specific projects, and you want to level up what you can add to the specific project.
I mean, so sometimes, because if you're based in the UK, sometimes because the funding is short, you can say some people try to find a postdoc in Europe in general, actually. A postdoc is a way to extend the time of the PhD because we don't give funding for a full 5-6 years, basically. So you could, if that's the case, which is consistent with what Alessandro is saying, is you might not have gone on the job market, but in anticipation of going on the job market, you're going to be better prepared. You should tell people, I'm applying for this postdoc because I want to do some more research, so that I'm going to be more prepared, so that when I go on the job market, I can have this top position that eventually will allow me to get tenure at a top place, basically. So that's kind of how I would frame it. So there's two possibilities. Either you have gone on the job market and it has been tough, or in anticipation of going in the job market in the future, you want to extend your funding, you do that. So in either situation, you need to sell the idea that you want some extra time to do some more research, ideally with the people where you are applying to, with a view of going on the job market, with letters from that place as well on top of the previous place, to with a view of doing as well as possible, publishing your papers, and then getting tenure at a place.
Thank you very much.
Let's take one last question.
Okay. Thank you all for the advice. I have one question. So how does the collaboration come naturally? So in your opinion, what's the best way for the PhD student or the junior researchers to get some co-authorship? I know that we shouldn't be too aggressive. We should be careful about that.
So it's like dating. When you find the right person, you know it. Ex ante is a bit tough, so be ready to explore your options. Be open, because I've written paper with someone who interviewed me on the job market. I've written paper with someone who was a fellow PhD student, but it was a couple of years ahead. I've written a paper 6-7 years after I finished the program. I've written paper with more senior people, with more junior people now, and it's just you have to be open and just try to have the incentive aligned. That I think is very important. Sometimes it's okay to work with people at different stage of your career. Early on, there are pros and cons. You can learn a lot from working with more senior people, but sometimes you do the work and then the paper referred as the paper of the senior person, right? So that's a downside. But you learn a lot by doing with these more senior people. Let me just tell you that definitely now I see that it used to be the case that people were expecting to see before tenure a solo author paper. So it was important to have one. Now I know that the profession has changed, the production function has changed, so we might be more open to give tenure to someone who doesn't necessarily have a solo author paper, but they have to be able to show independency. So be mindful. It's if you work only with senior people and then you show up for tenure at some point later on, then they might be held against you. So again, it's very serendipitous. You would not know who you're going to work with, but once you find the right team, you're going to notice that it's actually much better. It's more fun. You look forward to the phone call. You look forward to the revision. Those are the teams that you want to foster and you want to keep going. And then there are ones that are super painful. You don't want to do that phone call. So learn, and then as you learn, you make decisions and you move on. Sometimes when you need to, or you continue collaboration for decades.
This doesn't go to your question about how things organically arise. Sometimes it's just having a conversation with somebody, or, oh, I saw this paper. Oh, yeah, I was wondering this too. What do you think about this? But I would say, again, when you go up for tenure, if you are consistently only working with your advisor, people, again, are going to question whether or not you have the intellectual power to come up with your own ideas. So I would encourage at least some, even if you have a good working relationship, to try to work with some other people as part of your portfolio prior to tenure.
So as a PhD student, you definitely want to have co-authored projects with senior faculty, right? And with junior faculty, and you just want to work with multiple people because you're going to learn so much from that process, and you're not ready yet, quite frankly, to be like 2 PhD students doing a paper together is usually a bad idea, honestly. You're just not ready yet. And so you'll end up wasting a lot of time where having a faculty member on there would have helped a lot. But how do you get those co-authorship relationships? I'd say that there's a lot of different ways to do it. So first, be willing to work as a research assistant. And then when you are a research assistant, you do an incredible job, but you're not just executing, right? You're doing all of those things in terms of thinking about, why is this research question important? What could we be doing to, right, the intellectual curiosity? And you're demonstrating that by taking what the professors asked you for further. And you're coming back to that next meeting with, here are the results that and you better have done what they asked you for. But also, I did this and this to get at that same question in a couple of different ways. And if you do that, you will often end up being a co-author and not just a research assistant, right? So that's one. Another way, and this is probably more once you're, well, no, even as a PhD student, this has happened. I've had students who have come to me with ideas, right? And they'll say, look, I have this idea. I'd like to work with you on it. And a lot of times, the idea is actually not that great, but there's a seed of something there, or there's a data set that I didn't know about that gets me thinking, and we kind of work on it together, and we transform that into something that would be exciting to work on. And some of the papers that I have with former PhD students came about that way. So be willing to be an RA on their ideas. Be willing to go to faculty with your ideas, right? And both of those can be very helpful to build those relationships.
I think that was the last word, I think.
Okay, so dear mentors, Ondra, Devin, Alex, and Alessandro, thank you so much for this amazing mentoring session. on behalf of the Financial Management Accounting Research Conference, our heartfelt, thanks for doing this. And also, I think I'm also extending a very warm thank you on behalf of the PhD students. Thank you, everybody. And I think now is the time for a big clap for everybody. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much.